All right. Good morning, Mr. Wolf. How are you?
Good morning. Good morning. I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Oh, I tell you, man, we are at toward the end of January. It's hard to believe how fast this month is going, huh?
It's crazy, man. Already, yeah, basically already done. We'll be last Friday of January, so it's pretty
Yeah.
wild. Yeah.
Yeah, we've got so much going on. We've got, contract classes, we've got our economic forecast coming up.
hmm
So we'll put a link below in this message, or reach out to one of us and we can send you the link as well. And that'll be virtual this year. We're excited for that.
It'll be very, very awesome. Very exciting stuff.
Yeah. So one of the things I think we would be good for us to talk about today is our industry partners and those relationships.
hmm
There are a ton when you start going down the line, from lenders to inspectors to title companies to home warranty companies, you name it. And I think there's a little bit of misconception of what some of them can do and what some of them can't do. But one of the things that we talked about when we did our business planning in November was partnering with an affiliate that is invested in his or her business, right?
Right.
And whether, as we all know, if we're working with one of our mortgage lending partners, they're really, really interested with buyers, right? Our title companies are probably, and home warranty companies are probably more engaged with our sellers, usually, right?
hmm
So how do we leverage those relationships in a way that, as an agent, we come to our clients with a squad, with our team?
Right.
What are your thoughts on that?
So a couple of things. I think it's best to, first of all, I think we all know this, but it bears repeating that no matter what our relationships are, it's important that our sellers or our buyers, our clients, are the ones that are going to make the decision on who they use for their lender, who they use for their title company, and so on. Home warranty on you, baby. You can pay for whatever you want to pay for.
Mhm,
But for the most part, it is our clients who get to make that decision, right?
mhm,
That said, it's pretty often we get asked for suggestions or recommendations, right?
mhm.
And I think it's really important to be really to take those requests seriously and be really diligent when you have your meetings, you have your conversations with your lenders and your title partners, your potential lenders and title partners, I guess, to make sure they're going to they're going to act in a way that put your client's interest first and are really going to make sure that you put them on the path to success as best as possible, right? We're trying to create a team here.
Right,
So
right.
from our lender perspectives, I always like to know, like, well, how comfortable you working with different kinds of buyers, right? How experienced are you with first time home buyers? How experienced are you with VAs? How experienced are you in the jumbo market, right? Because not every team and not every individual lender worked with those different categories of clients as effectively as they might with another one, right? So, and it's okay, right? Like if you have a client who's you're really strong, have a good relationship, have taken care of all of your first time home buyers, but they've never done a VA buyer, it's okay to have a conversation like, hey, you know what? I don't know if this is, talk to me about it. How is this gonna be your first time? How do we do this, right? Or do you have another partner that's more experienced with veterans, right? So I think that's totally okay, right? Same thing on the title side, right? Like not every transaction is standard, right? You might have a client who's selling a rental property, so they may not want to use a general warranty deed, or you may have a client who's selling, like, someone unfortunately may have passed away, so they might be using a personal representative's deed, right? They
Right.
might have to be dealing with transferring funds into and out of a trust, and there's more documentation and there's more steps to that than there is the standard, transaction where seller A is selling to buyer B, right?
Mhm, mhm.
So just have conversations and make sure that you're recommending the right person for the individual scenario that your client needs, right?
Right. I totally
Um,
agree.
yeah.
And also I think, and good point, that we should always provide our referrals and our partners, right? But at the same time, too, depending upon that unique situation and geography, there are some that just work better in certain areas,
hmm
right? They specialize. I think of people that work with 1031 exchanges. That is
hmm
a skill, right? Relocation, which we do a lot of relocation. That's just it's a little bit different transaction on the administrative side, right?
Yeah, and geography matters a ton,
Yeah.
right? So I, you know,
Mhm, mhm,
I have kind of a weird footprint. I'll work a lot of like downtown Denver Metro, but I also have relationships and I do a lot of business in like Douglas County and Elbert County and some of those more rural areas out there.
mhm.
And so if I have a listing in, in Elbert County, and I get an offer that has, hey, I want title work in 6 days. I'm like, hey, Haas, they don't go, you might need to give them a little
Right.
extra time down there, right? Because they just have less people working, right? And they
Right.
have more stuff to research to do. Is this, you're
Right.
buying 30 acres, right? Does this property actually align with that, right? So,
Right.
so having that kind of knowledge is important for us too, to understand don't just take every contract, right? Review that and say, hey, hey, lender, can you get an appraisal done in 10 days? Hey, title company, can you get all your research done in 6 days or 7 days, right? So I think it's important to understand some of those challenges that our lender partners or title partners might have, and to have those conversations too, right? Just to make sure that we're not agreeing to anything that we can't deliver on.
Right. As you're talking through this, we recently had a transaction up in Northeast, and it was on a 35-acre tract, and it needed to be actually surveyed. The
Mm-hmm.
ILC wasn't going to be sufficient. And when the agent wrote it, they wrote a standard like 35-day, contract, right? But come to
Mm-hmm.
find out, a surveyor for that size and that location was like 8 weeks out. Right. That was the fastest we could get one out there. So then we had to go
Mm-hmm.
back and do amendments and change whatnot. But, I think also having a phone call, because that would be on the buyer side, generally speaking,
Mm-hmm.
or potentially the seller side, depending upon how that agreement was written up. But having a conversation saying, look, we may want to push these dates out and then use honor before, those type of things. Because you could get your neighborhood stuff, you can get your normal title work, you can get your normal loan stuff, right? But if you're waiting on an actual survey to close on the property, well, okay, that's kind of a title company thing, right?
Sure.
That could change things, right? And also for the pins that are in the ground in rural areas, and I think you're very well aware of this, if it's below 41 degrees, sometimes the equipment just doesn't work.
Right.
So if you've got 3 weeks or 4 weeks, or if you're in the mountains, you may not be able to do that till spring, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there could be some things that have to be done post closing potentially, or you suggest your dates, right? So those things that we've learned in dealing with land and dealing with rural property that I think a lot of people just don't know. And if the title company is not experienced with that, that's the kind of partner you need, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then recently we've talked a little bit about some creative financing options like um, 3-in-1, 2-in-1, types of buy down,
Mm-hmm.
which are
Mm-hmm.
programs, right? That some of our lending partners can offer. Well, for some of our buyers, that's a great option, right? For some, it may not make sense, but again, I think we divert that to our lending partners, right?
Right.
you
Well, yeah,
know,
and I think that's what they want us to do, right? Because it's, speaking specifically about the 2 and 3-1 buy downs, it's not like a no MI program they can just offer to a client who qualifies, right? So they need to be funded, right? And so we need two things to happen, right? That individual buyer needs to be qualified to where it makes sense, right? And then we need to be able to go out and secure some cash on the other end
yeah,
from, likely the seller, but maybe some other
yeah,
resources. Maybe they get a gift. There's a lot of ways we can go about that, right?
right,
But it doesn't, it's got to make sense for each individual portion of this, right? And so I think it's really important to
mhm,
have those conversations early, right? Like, hey, whoever you're working with, hey, lender partner, my client is, would love to have either, and some people just want to not have all their cash go at closing too, right? Because closing fees and things like that are going to be a little expensive, right? So hey, my buyer would love to consider a 2-1 buy down as an option.
right,
Can you talk them through that? Can you tell me
right,
about, and that way you're kind of like setting up that conversation and teeing them up to make it really nice and smooth so that your person can be prepared with the right questions. And then obviously your buyer would need to be prepared with the answers that are going to be, honest and accurate for them. And then if it works, we go out and try to get the cash, right? But it's not something we can guarantee. So it's always good to kind of set it up that way, right?
right,
And it's just like the same conversations we have on the seller side. It's, like, oh, well, what am I paying for? What is a potential buyer paying for? It's like, well, everything's negotiable, man. Like
right,
all things being equal, if things kind of follow a standard protocol, then we're probably going to split the services fee most of the time, and then honestly, Mr. Seller, you'll probably be asked to pick up a lot of the fees. Like you'll probably pay a lot of the fees to like transfer, an HOA if there's a, for instance, right? Or there'll be some fees that you pay for on the sell side, likely
right,
that, just traditionally that's the way it's gone. But who knows? Right now, we're in this position where buyers have a little more flexibility. But if we swing back to a position we were in a couple of years ago, buyers were picking up a lot of those fees because they wanted to make their offer more attractive to sellers, right? So it's, everything's negotiable. You have to walk through that, and you have to make sure that, your lender and title partners are backing you up on that end too, right? Another thing I want to bring up, I think, is like kind of a somewhat forgotten or maybe not considered a partner, specifically on the buy side, is the inspectors that we, get asked to recommend a lot of times too, right?
Yeah.
Because that's a question I get asked all the time, right? And it's like, and that one can be kind of scary because it's like, hey man, if I recommend, John Smith Inspection and they miss something, then that's obviously a really terrible thing for everybody, right? So I think it's important to have those conversations too, and have if your clients ask you, it's always, or I always try to get out in front of it early, as we do with all of our situations where, hey, we know an inspection is going to happen. So during part of our like early shopping phase, like, hey, just keep in mind there's going to be things that we see. If I see something in plain sight, I will point it out to you, right? That's where if I see a roof sagging, if I see a crack in a basement wall, I'm going to point that out. It's like, hey, that's just something to take note of. If we decide to move forward on this, want to mention that to the inspector. Oh, by the way, do you have an inspector that you've worked with in the past, or do you have anyone that any inspection company you'd like to use? And transparently, most people don't, man. That's just not something like we don't, you're probably much more likely to know a lender or a realtor than you are to know an inspector, right? So I think it's good to kind of have a couple companies, and the questions I might ask them is, like, hey, have you pursued any sort of certification, right? Because there's no inspection certification, but are you, a licensed contractor? Do you have any sort of training in, construction or structural engineering or something like that? Like those are really great skills that can give that person some more power, right? And are you, do you offer any sort of limited warranty post closing if something were to get missed on inspection? Because not everyone does, right? So we are going to offer our own home warranty as Winninger agents, but not everyone does that. And I like to think that there's a little extra security that, an inspector, if they miss something, would have to make that buyer whole. I think that's fair, right? So I try to recommend people who have the questions or the right answers to those questions in my mind if I'm going to make a recommendation to a buyer. And again, it's a little tougher because geography and availability are big things for inspections, right? Because a lot of times we want our inspections to be within that like 7 to 10 day window of going under contract. And if you're an awesome, inspection company has, structural engineers and offers a great warranty and all that stuff isn't available at that time, or maybe they can't get back your radon test, but they can't, you have to have a couple people. You have to have a good little stable of inspectors that are all solid and are going to meet your basic needs for your buyers that you can make recommendations for, right? And, it's all different, right?
Yeah, I totally agree. And again, how we started this conversation was about our relationships, our partnerships, right? And our teams around us. And we want to have, they're not going to catch everything, right? I mean,
No.
if in a home inspection, we tell our clients it's good for one calendar day, right? The day the individual is there. Things break the next day, right? Whatever that might be, right? So it's about also being able to they have good resources too, right? To say, hey, there's 3 or 4 items on here. It's not deal breaker, but it's kind of your honey-do list, right? I can give you a couple of names of people that can look into it, but it doesn't need to be handled today. Now, when we shift, and as we're shifting, we're at this more neutral market, but as we shift to a buyer's market, right? Sellers are going to have to be more open to that. Also, the buyer may be in a different position to ask for certain things too, right? Sure. And then also what's realistic and what's not realistic, right? I mean, even if there's been a lot of renovations done in the last 36 months, there's been some fix and flips done in the last 36 months. Inspectors not going to get behind the walls, right? They're not going to open anything up. But at the same time, one of the things that we would suggest is we're going to asking for permits, asking for receipts, asking for contractors insurance, things like that as part of our due diligence, right? To set the buyer up to be in the best position, right? In the event that there's a problem, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a great thing that we can do to take in that extra step. It's not just about getting them under contract, right? It's about getting them through the transaction.
Of course. And that's our real job, right? Is to help this thing get to closing, right? Certainly we're going to market the property on the sell side. certainly we're going to guide our clients to price that fit their needs on the buy side, but ultimately we all are invested in getting this thing to closing because that's what all parties want, right? And just to kind of kick off what you said, as far as like getting permits and making sure everything's, you know, filed appropriately, sellers and investors out there, please do this. I know it can be a little bit more of an expense, but trust me, it offers you so much protection on the back end, right? So, and if you have the skills to do it yourself, that's all the better. But just file the paperwork, get the permits, take care of all that stuff, right? Because man, you know, even if you make it through 10 transactions, everything is hunky dory. If your contractor makes an error, or if you make an error as a, you know, personal developer, and you're not properly insured, you don't have permits pulled, man, that can cost you your business for a lifetime. Like I've seen it happen in businesses that we're doing a good job, man. Obviously, it's there to catch the bad guys, but there's businesses do a good job, and everyone's allowed to have a bad day. But if we don't file the proper paperwork, or we don't, you know, insure ourselves correctly, and we make an error or make a inaccurate statement on a seller's property disclosure, and it finds out later that, oh, hey, we didn't remediate the asbestos, or we didn't replace the sewer line to the street like we said we did, that gets to be a, you know, multi $10,000 lawsuit real quick, right? And you said you did it, right? So what else can we do? You know, so just, man, make sure you file those permits, guys. It just you're so protected. It protects everybody. It's so worth it.
Well, and I think you make a really good point, because you've got, when these things happen and you're on the buy side, the first phone call they make is to us. And a lot of times we're just completely caught off guard. You're like, well, what are you talking about? You know, and then we start to get into it and we start to understand. Well, then what happens is that buyer, in most cases, has to engage someone to evaluate it. I mean, they do have a duty to correct a problem immediately, regardless of whose fault it is. We flush everything else down the back end, right? And we see that a lot of times, you know, after people move in from water heaters or plumbing or electrical type issues, they need to handle it now, and then we will figure out where the breakdown was. And usually, when we get somebody in there and they say, "Wait a second here," you know, like plumbing hasn't been updated. The pipe to the street that was never replaced, but we have a document that says it was. You know, I mean, that's when we understand all that. If it never fails, you don't know, right? You know, and then all of a sudden, fast forward, and this happened to us. We were in our house for 12 years, and the people we bought it from had some repair done, said they did. Come to find out, 12 years later, they never did it. Well, we didn't know. We didn't really have any issues. There was only 2 of us in the house. People buying a house are going to be a family of like 6, right? So it more than likely was going to be a problem, right? So we ended up having to go through that process and have the line repaired from the house to the street to the main. But again, unbeknownst to us, we didn't know, you know, and fortunately, we were able to get all that work done and get it done prior to closing. This was well before, you know, pandemic times. This was 10 years ago. 12 years ago, right? So, gosh, I tell you what, when you start doing the math, Andrew, you really start to realize how old you are. But those things happen, and then it creates this challenging experience sometime between the client and their agent. And especially if there were other issues, right? If there were other issues from lending, issues with title, issues with appraisals, it just goes on and on and on. And even though as an individual, you may not be able to control any of it. Sometimes it's just not managed correctly, right? And sometimes we just manage expectations and manage our client the best way we can. That's all we can do, right? And I think Colorado did a great job coming into the last year, of taking some of the responsibility away. So for example, the seller, in most cases, will ask their HOA, or the title company will ask the HOA for HOA documents, CIC docs, CC&Rs, whatever you're called, wherever you live. But the seller can't control that process. If they just flat out don't get back to you, I mean, what are you gonna do, right? Where before it fell on the seller as a terminable thing, kind of thing, right? Like the seller did something wrong. You know, same with an appraiser. The buyer can't control that, right? The lender controls that, right? And that whole process is communication. Yes, the buyer has no control over that. But before, right, we blame the buyer, we blame the seller, and I was like, they no control over that, right? So I think fully understanding our contracts is a big deal, but at the same time, also fully understanding that process all the way through,
Mhm.
right? And that's where we build those relationships. That's where we get that call. Another reason why we get that call back when someone wants to sell their house.
Right. And a couple things on that, right? So I think it's important to have those conversations up front, right? So if you are the buyer, a buyer's agent, I should say, sorry, you want to talk to your lender, whomever your clients are working with, whether it's your recommendation or not, and say like, hey, here's my dates for appraisal. Can you comfortably meet those? Right. And if the answer is no, hey, then what can we do? We need to adjust this, right? And I'm going to put you on a call with the seller's agent. I need to back me up on that, right? So it doesn't look like I'm just pushing out dates for no reason, right? Same thing on the title side. You can say like, hey, here's my dates for CIC docs. Here's the contact of the HOA. Go get them. Can you get them in time, right? And obviously, like to your point, there's protections in the contract right now to where it affords a little more flexibility on both sides of that. But it's still important to like do what you say you're going to do largely, right? So if you as a seller are saying, hey, I'm going to get you, these documents by this date, I try to have them done before I even go live if I can, if possible, right? And same thing on the buy side. If you say, hey, appraisal's going to be done at this date, we'll let you know. And if I'm making that call the day before, it's like, hey, man, the appraiser's not going to be able to make it out there, we're protected, but that still introduces like an unsmooth portion of the contract, right? And still, in my opinion, makes us lose our footing a little bit, right? If we can't deliver what we say we're going to do. So usually stuff can be happening with a conversation up front. Obviously, they can't control it any more than we can. They want to meet those deadlines too. But if we ask them and give them a little, and make sure that we're lining ourselves up with their dates, we have agreement, then that's usually the best way to go forward, right?
Right.
And again, these are all and it's tough to know this up front, guys. It's tough to know whether a lender or a title person is going to perform their duties to the best of their ability right away or not, because you just don't know, right? And a lot of times, as realtors, we have our connection, our relationship is with the rep, be it on the lender or the title side, right? So, it's important to have honest, open conversation with those folks too, because if they're promising the world and their back end is a little bit more slower, then it's whose fault is it? Did they overpromise or did their back end not deliver in the way they thought they were going to, right? So it's tough to know without experience, guys. So it's okay to reach out to maybe some of your more experienced teammates, or whether you're a new agent or you're moving to a new area or a new company, it's okay to say like, hey, I'm new to Colorado as a new agent or a new realtor in Colorado. Who do you use for title and who do you use for lending? Can I, can you set up a coffee? Can we grab a beer? Can we do something, right? And have a connection with those people. Because then you're getting like a second layer of trust, right? By leaning on some of your cohort that have had experiences, have done transactions in this area, because it's those people, like the people who choose to work at X title company or X lender, believe in their product, right? They're all good people that want to make a living helping people out, right? And so they're going to sell their back end, right? But sometimes it doesn't work out, right? Sometimes you have, and even in those cases, sometimes you have real persnickety, person that's on the back end of a loan that's off-site, probably in a different state than Colorado, and especially if you're using a bank, and they're not invested personally in your client going forward, which is their prerogative. They're there to protect the loan,
right?
But it's okay to have those conversations and make sure we're getting those issues up front. So it's most of those issues we can solve if we find out about them enough ahead of time. It's when we find out about them the day before closing. They're like, how do I fix this? Right. So as much as we can mitigate that, ask for help, make connections, talk to the reps. And then, unfortunately, guys, you might have to roll the dice a little bit on one, right? You might have to take a chance on someone based upon the recommendations from your cohort and from your conversation with the rep. And most of the time it's going to work out. But if it doesn't, you take that data and we use it again next time.
You're exactly right. And again, it's about it. This is a relationship business. We're not in the house business. And I think over time, as people mature in their careers, they really realize that, and they really realize their industry partners. And then also, I think there's some do this better than others, but some are actively engaged with their realtors partner's business. So for example, for a new agent needs a completely different set of skills and handholding and marketing support than maybe someone like you or myself who's been in for a while, right? Same, especially with lenders, versus an agent who's been in for 10, 15, maybe 20 years, the things they need from their industry partners, there's some core things that are basic, yes, but the things they may need from marketing, support, training, right? Open house support's a big one, right? Marketing support, farming. We talk a lot about farming, right? Whether it's in person, whether it's via mail, snail mail, social media, email, however you're going to do farming, right? And also industry knowledge, right? There's a lot of things happening right now where people, you know, we did our job. We found them in the right neighborhood. We found them the right house, right? At the right price, right? But now fast forward 3, 4, 5 years, things in their life are changing. You know, they're looking for a second home, maybe for themselves. Maybe it's a second home for short-term rental. Maybe they've got a kid that just got accepted to a college on the East Coast, right? And they, instead of, you know, paying tuition in dorms, they're going to buy something, right? And they're going to have a bunch of families paid for it. There's a lot of just things, right? So sometimes we can help facilitate transactions and help people solve problems, right? Just by being present and being engaged with their relationships. I think we do a good job of that at Windermere. I really, truly do. However, that being said, I don't know that all of them do. I think last week we shared a stat of 83% or so don't even follow up with the clients post-closing, right?
Right.
So I think we do a really, really good job of that with some of our tools. You know, some of it's snail mail, some of it's social, some of it's email, and quite honestly, some of it's just this device right here, the phone. You know, and so that's a big piece of our business that I don't think that all of our industry partners do post-closing. I'm not confident that they all do. I know some do, but I know a lot of them don't.
Right. And I think that's an important question to ask too, is like, hey, you know, title or lender person, like what is your follow-up? What does your nurture program look like? Right. Because the folks I work with have like, they reach out on birthdays and they reach out on house anniversaries every year, you know, and that's probably enough, guys. Like we should be doing a lot more as their actual agent. But for their lender or their title rep to be reaching out twice a year is pretty darn good, guys. So if you can make that connection, obviously that's probably more of a lender thing than anything else, you know. But man, if you're able to connect with a lender because then they're getting, you know, they're getting a couple interactions a year from you, they're getting a couple from them, and then when the time comes around where they want to sell again, they're likely going to want to buy. If they want to buy in your network, that's great, because then we're not having the conversation of, oh, hey, who do I call? Who do you know from a lender? It's like, oh, hey, do you want to call your lender again? Great. Let them know that you're interested in buying, and I'll have them reach out to you. Right. So it just makes things more simple and it unifies that team even further. Right. So and obviously if you had a good experience with this lender, you probably have done several transactions with them over the last several years. So now your process is even more solidified because you've had a good experience. Right. So I think it's really easy to rely on that, to have that as another backup, and it solidifies that team even more in your buyer's mind, because now you guys are a unit, right? We want to have a similar experience for a seller. Obviously, title doesn't have the same relationship with a seller as a lender does the buyer, but there should still be a familiarity there, right? And it's still nice when they kind of reach out on occasion. You know, a lot of good title companies will send out, you know, general holiday updates and things like that, right? So it's good if you can find those companies are going to have a nurture program as part of their client retention program. Then it just kind of usually coincides with where it's pretty tightly, and you can rely on that to kind of make sure that those relationships are continuing to solidify with your clients, so you can continue to support them and serve them.
Right, you're right. You know, we alluded to it a little bit earlier, maybe with our little bit of our time left. Home warranty companies, and man, I tell you, in my 16 years, 17 years in the business, and even before that, as owning rental properties and then our primary residence, we've been using home warranties for decades. And my wife used to sell those years ago when she used to live in California. They can make or break relationships, right?
Yeah.
And you have a general, I mean, they're an insurance company at the end of the day. They're there to make money, right? But also they have a couple of things that I have found to be amazing with home warranty companies. They have already vetted people, right? So they have vetted plumbers and framers and drywallers and this, that, and the other, right? Appliance repair people seem to be a big one, right? They've vetted all those people. So even if something is not covered, right? making a phone call to your rep saying, hey, they're not even going to file a claim because they know it's not covered, but who would we call if it was covered? Right. And then what I normally do is I call that vendor and say, hey, the Wolves are going to be contacting you. They're a client of ours. They've been using home warranties for years. This one's not covered, but you were referred to us from the home warranty company. See, usually what happens is they'll fit them in quicker because they want to keep that relationship. And usually 9 times out of 10, they will also do some sort of a discount off of their retail rack rate, which saves our client a little bit of money. Okay.
Yeah.
Also, there have been scenarios, and not all, but there have been scenarios over the years where a home warranty company will go ahead and cover something because it is a gray area, right? Or we put enough business through there that they're like, you know what? They do 36, 50, 60 transactions a year with us, and we very rarely hear from their clients. We can probably cover them on this one. You know, that does happen from time to time. But again, if you don't have that relationship and are not engaged with your rep in this example, good luck probably in getting something like that done.
Yeah, and I agree, man. Home warranty is like I started off that with you in my first transaction in my real estate career. You said, hey, this is what I do. I think it's really valuable. And I've bought it for every client since, right? Buying or selling, they get a home warranty from me. And I mean, they don't, thankfully, haven't had to use it every time, but there's been a handful of times where my clients had to use their home warranty, and it has saved them a ton of money and a ton of headache, right? It's, I mean, I don't know about you. I mean, I'm pretty familiar with the contract. Is there any other like non-essential servicer to a transaction gets called out specifically in the Colorado real estate contract besides the warranty company? Line 18.5, it's great. Like, obviously we don't, clients, I hate to break this to realtors, clients do not need us to sell their house or buy a house. You can do your own home inspection. You need to be a licensed appraiser. But outside of that, like, so the appraiser is the only 100% necessary portion to a real estate transaction, right? They don't call us out by name in the real estate contract. Line 18.5 and the contract literally just says home warranties exist. Like that's how impactful they can be for our clients in the back end, is that the contract calls out a non-essential portion of the contract just to let the public know that these are a thing that you can buy. So that to me is a really big clue that says like, hey, maybe I should go ahead and pick this up for my client. It's going to be a great item of value and it makes them feel safe and secure. And like anyone else in our industry, there are value gaps between various and sundry servicers. Okay. So, I mean, I know that we are both big proponents of Blue Ribbon Home Warranty. I know America's First Home Warranty is very solid, right? And there's a lot of really, really good ones out there, but make sure you do your due diligence, like dig into their warranty programs a little bit. I'm not saying that you have to read the lengthy contract of every word that the home warranty covers, because that is a task, but you should have a general idea about what is covered and what isn't. You should have a general idea about what the value is and what their cost might be for a copay, and talk to their reps. Like, hey, I've had conversations before where I'm like, hey, we just got through inspection. My client's a little bit worried about this. I don't see it covered in any of your standard plans. Can I add additional coverage for the AC unit, for the evaporative cooler, for whatever, right? And the answer has almost always been, at least with Blue Ribbon, is yes. And here's the fee. And it's usually fairly modest, right? So I think it's worth having conversations and investing in gaining that a little bit. Again, talk to your team leads, talk to your managing brokers, talk to your cohort. Do you guys like home warranties? If yes, who do you use, right? And then investigate there on your own. Talk to the rep. Read their material a little bit, see what they cover. But I think I've never had anyone get upset they got a home warranty and set a bottle of wine for me at closing. And I've gotten several phone calls over the last several years. Usually it's about 1, maybe 2 a year that says like, hey man, thank you so much. The water heater blew out when we were on vacation and it caused $30,000 of damage and we paid a $90 copay and they replaced it all. That's an extreme example, but it's a real one. That one happened to me or happened to my clients, and they were able to get made whole for incredibly less. No insurance claim, no nothing. They called their warranty person. They took care of it. It worked out,
No, I totally agree, man. Well, I think our theme of relationship, I think we give some great examples. And one of the things that we think we've done a really good job is having a good, decent bank of all of these affiliates. all the way up and down the Front Range, and some realtors have great relationships and use the same ones, and other ones use other ones. But I think it's good for us. We have a number of resources for people if they work with us at Windermere.
100%. Yeah. And we would love to have you guys over here, but I would say if you are a client out there, a potential client, or if you are a realtor working in the field and you're happy with your brokerage, I totally understand that. But if you need resources, I'm happy to connect you with any of our great referral partners here, any of our great people that service our clients, because they do a great job. So
Right.
we are both invested in, as a company, Windermere is invested in like raising the quality of the experience of every client in the state of Colorado. So please reach out. I'll connect you with the best lenders, the best title rep, and the best home warranty rep that I can possibly muster for you, just so you and your clients are taken care of, guys. So don't hesitate to reach out. Don't feel like you're obligated to join the team, though you should feel welcome. But we want to make sure that people are taken care of, and we truly believe we've created a list of some of the best people you can possibly work with, and they've done a great job for us and for our clients.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. Well, good, man. It's a great discussion today. I think
Yeah.
I love this stuff. So that's this will air on Friday, roughly the 27th. We got a busy weekend ahead. We got a bunch of playoff games.
Yeah, right. It's the weekend before the break. It's some fun games last night and Saturday. And then it should be some good stuff. I know I got a busy one coming up here. Well, we have our home tournament for Olympian Wrestling Club is this Saturday, so I'll be helping out there, doing a little volunteer work. So probably have about 800 to 1,000 wrestlers usually are kind of come through and compete in there. So should be pretty fun. If you guys are in the Castle Rock area, want to come by Castle High School and see a bunch of little squirts try to wrestle each other, it should be a good time. But yeah, outside of that, guys, it's our last Fun Fact Friday for January. So we'll see you guys back here in February. We'll have a new theme and another guest speaker, probably not the first week, but we will probably around week 2, and looking forward to that. So we'll connect with you guys again here shortly.
That's awesome. Well, thank you. Awesome. Thank you so much, Andrew. It's always good talking to you.
All right. See you guys. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.